was due. Now, it is fairly common to see gambling companies advertise during football matches or even to sponsor teams. But the former England goalkeeper Peter Shilton says his exposure to this type of advertising triggered a gambling addiction, which he feels ruined his life. He was one of a group of people who handed a petition into Downing Street calling for an end to gambling sponsorship in sport. Our reporter Alistair McGowan went with him.
As England's most capped player, Peter Shilton has made many saves for his country, but now he wants to help gambling addicts like himself. At Downing Street today, he presented a petition with 12,000 names on it, calling for an end to gambling advertising in football. He knows only too well of the damage it can do, even to his partner Steph, having been an addict for 45 years.
It was devastating, really devastating. It was such a learning journey that I went on, and we continue to go on when you hear the devastation. You know, a new statistic has come out that over 650 predominantly youngsters are committing suicide every year through gambling addiction, and it's almost impossible for them to quit at the moment, because particularly in sport and football, you know, there's so much gambling advertising going on.
The reason that Shilton and families who've lost loved ones are here is because the government faces a potentially crucial decision about gambling laws this autumn.
It does need to change. I mean, it's ridiculous. We get more and more letters of people saying how much the gambling keeps cropping up on TV, and from gamblers who have quit and then suddenly they get a pop-up advert or something like that. It needs to be regulated. It's not being regulated properly, and I think this government needs to do something about it.
English Football League chairman Rick Parry says a gambling ban could cost clubs a total of £40 million each year and could send smaller ones under. But the Department for Culture, Media and Sport says it is absolutely committed to protecting people at risk of gambling-related harm and will ensure new laws are fit for the digital age, including marketing and advertising. Charles and Liz Ritchie are also campaigning for law change. Their son Jack committed suicide in 2017 following his addiction, and they now help other bereaved families through a group called Gambling with Lives.
Jack's with us every time we're doing anything like this. You know, it is all about Jack and our memories of him, and we know that he would want this change. You know, that Jack was a fanatical football supporter. He loved it more than any other sporting activity, and he would see the damage that football has done and is doing to his peers.
All concerned now face an anxious wait to see what the government decides. But with cross-party support, their hope is that change will come before more lives are damaged. Alistair McGowan, BBC News.
Well, the Betting and Gaming Council have issued a statement regarding their plans about betting adverts. It reads, "Our members introduced the whistle-to-whistle ban on TV betting commercials during live sport before the 9 p.m. watershed, which has led to a 97% reduction in the amount of such ads seen by children at that time." Well, we heard from Charles Ritchie, one of the co-founders of Gambling with Lives, in our report a little earlier. Joining us now is Tom Fleming, who's also from that organisation. Tom, thank you very much for speaking to us. We heard from Peter Shilton saying that he gambled millions away over 45 years, but felt that he wasn't really an addict. How common is that?
Very common, I think. I think there's often, especially when it comes to perhaps gambling addiction, perhaps a bit misunderstood. And perhaps the kind of image that we might hold in our heads when we think of someone who's addicted to gambling is, you know, perhaps somebody hanging around the bookies all day, drinking in the daytime. But actually, that's simply not true. And gambling addiction does not discriminate. There are between 430,000 and 1.4 million gambling addicts in the UK. So it can affect absolutely anybody.
Well, that's quite a startling statistic of how many people are gambling. But the NHS said that they predicted 400,000 people in England had an addiction to gambling. But how much do you think that lockdown may have increased that figure?
I think it really did, yeah, because, you know, there's a lot of tension around. People were perhaps feeling sad, anxious, worried about money. And even though live sports were obviously suspended for the first part of last year, weren't they? From March to June, live sports were completely suspended. But actually what we saw then was the industry kind of cross-sell and push their more addictive products, actually, which are obviously more profitable as well. things like casino online games that don't rely on actual sporting events taking place. So I think lockdown would have had a fairly catastrophic effect on gambling addiction numbers in this country.
There's often quite an almost friendly face of gambling presented, especially in regards to sport. How dangerous do you feel that is, especially when it comes to youngsters?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's part of the campaign that Peter was just talking about. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big part of that normalisation and sort of as you say, the friendly face. That process kind of comes from, partially anyway, from advertising and sponsorship within football, because people are just surrounded by gambling logos, by gambling brands, and they just grow up thinking that it's normal and that it's fun and it's a normal, safe industry. When actually the reality is very different.
All right, Tom Fleming, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Tom Fleming from Gambling with Lives there. And apologies for the slight sound issues while speaking to Tom Fleming.